Part two of Awakening with Trauma. This is the probably third or fourth time I've tried to make this video. This is getting more and more challenging. I think next time something like this comes up, I will probably have to bang them all out at once, because the longer it goes, the harder it is to remember. So part two is safety. Physical violence. Those of us who've experienced extreme trauma in that area, abuse, and all of the different flavors that comes in. I think more than a lot of the other ones, this one presents the biggest sense of challenges in the awakening. When we've experienced physical abuse, violence, especially when we're growing up, that creates a sense of, as like a giant sense of the entire world saying, not safe. For me, there was some violence when I grew up. My parents were functioning-ish alcoholics, and when they were sober, they were fine, and when they were drinking, they weren't. My father was also in the Marines, so you can imagine what that's like. That's a whole culture based around being aggressive and violent. And as I grew up and got older, I found myself in a lot of situations where I was getting into physical altercations with people. I was a very rebellious personality. Seemed to be really wired into not only not having a verbal filter, just saying what I thought, but also having a really deep sense of what was fair and what wasn't fair, and also really nerdy. I had big ears and crooked teeth and glasses, and my mom wouldn't let me buy cool clothes. So, but I had a mouth on me. And when something went funny, I would usually speak up. So that got me into a lot of trouble. And then as I turned to alternate sources to deal with my own trauma, things like drugs, alcohol, it just got worse, because that put me into environments and that where violence was prevalent, and eventually led to prison, which, short of being in like an actual combat zone, I think is one of the places where you can experience some of the worst behavior of humans towards other humans, and it happens very quickly and many times without warning, and usually serious injury or death can be the result of that. So that's just a little bit about here. I know others have experienced different types of stuff. I'm just relating what happened for me. So when we are creating our identities, or rather when our identities are being shaped for us through our formative years, when violence is introduced, it can create some real problems in relating to the world. And I know here that I found myself constantly assessing and viewing anything and everything as a potential threat. Generally, that stemmed around people. And I discovered over the years that I cultivated somewhat of a superpower of being able to sense who was a threat and who wasn't. People tend to radiate signatures on an energetic level, and also body language, habits, stuff like that. So without really understanding what was happening, what my baseline existence was on high alert at all times. And that creates what I would say is a bar, which is not, which doesn't fall into the normal circumstances. The problem is that it normalizes, and it almost will blend and fade into the background. So there's the assumption, like the deep assumption, that this is just how life is. This is just the way it is. And I didn't have anything that told me different, because I had a consistent stream of feeling not safe, of violence, of unexpected and very quick incidents that were really, really startling. So as I moved into the awakening process, which funny enough, I started in prison and I found a book about meditation, and that led to other books, and put myself in self-imposed retreats, and then had a first initial shift, the Kensho. I found that initially what happened was there was a sense of freedom. There was definitely a sense of freedom. Um, and meditation and inquiry for a period of time became my best friends. That became a still safe place for me to retreat to, something that equated to stability, some sort of sense of like a presence or a here-ness, um, that I could rest into even in the middle of this really hostile environment. And it just felt nice. As the layers of identity stripped off slowly, which is what happens, I think, for many of us who are undertaking this journey, as the layers of identity stripped off, it seemed that the first ones were all the ones that weren't addressing anything around safety. So it could be things like preferences, or all of the ones that were kind of neutral or ambiguous. And meditation, inquiry was really, really beneficial in that. And it started to just peel off all of the top stuff. Now, because I had experienced some shifts, I would have told you at any given point in time, before I uncovered the deeper layers, that I felt like I had just pretty much unpacked an awful lot of shadow material, that I had really worked through an awful lot of stuff. Because this, what I now refer to as this trauma ball, this sense of stored energies, fears, identities, lenses through which I viewed life and my experiences, was just sitting there, and it was really, really untouched. What I found before I started to touch into that was one of the most deeply frustrating aspects of moving through an awakening process with this trauma was that maybe after a period of meditation or some inquiry, or sometimes just randomly, I would have this huge opening, this really grand shift. And, uh, everything would be pure consciousness, or there was no sense of a person, or there was bliss, or there was complete universal love, all the different flavors of it. And in those moments, it felt so good and so correct and so perfect. And that trauma part of me, that part of the personality, just said yes. And there was this huge sense of relief. And I can remember on a couple of them, I was just crying and crying and crying, not out of sadness or despair, but literally from relief, from feeling, at the time, without knowing it, that entire persona was just lifted for a short period of time. That entire identity trauma structure was just gone. And I can even remember some of the thoughts. I went, well, thank God I don't have to worry anymore. I don't have to carry that around anymore. And inevitably, it would close down in the most heartbreaking fashion. And it usually wasn't very quick, like from 1 minute to the next. It was like watching these fucking doors just slowly close, like, and and then all the light went out of the room, and I was back into this trauma structure. And it was gut wrenching and heartbreaking, and very confusing, because I didn't understand what was happening. I had no idea why it was just open and closed, open and closed. It was right there. Where did it go? How do I get it back? Right. So that would motivate more sitting, more pushing, more effort, more reading, watching more YouTube videos, all of it. And just this really combination of like forcing, straining, and then also kind of a clawing and trying to grab at something that I had no idea how it had even left or opened up in the first place. And then in the days after that, the subsequent messages of failure, of I'm not going to be able to get this. I'm a hopeless case. This is never going to work out for me, would just be overwhelming. And that would come in and mix with already these unresolved messages that I had, this trauma, um, and plunge me into basically some kind of depression, despair. And then I found myself being really reactive. I would watch videos of teachers appearing to be so calm and so um, very serene, or interviews with teachers and students who had just had these huge openings, and you could just see that something had clearly happened, and there was a lightness and a joy, and maybe they were laughing, and I would look at them with hatred, jealousy, and then blame myself, and then blame them as well too. And I think this cycle went on 8 years, 10 years. I'm not saying it has to be that long for everybody, but this was really dug in for me. And it was because of that sense of safety. And what I uncovered over a period of time uh, was that there was actually this entire superstructure, this super identity, this meta trauma identity that was untouched and had not ever really had an opportunity to come up and to be looked at or to be addressed. And that was just sitting there. And it felt like it was just kind of running the show. So at some point in time, I came across a teacher, and they gave me a mantra to work with. And the mantra was not anything really fancy or in another language. It was very simple. And I was instructed to work with the statement, I love myself and I'm safe. And to hang on to that as much as I could and work with it over and over again. And the circumstances in my life were such that I had the time to be able to do that. And so I began working with it. And over a period of days, that brought up more of this residual trauma than I had ever experienced, I had ever thought was even there. I will say, qualifier, that this what happened here was an extreme case. I do not think this has to be like this for everybody. It's just how it happened here. Okay. And the everything came up, and it came up in the form of crying and sobbing and the body shutting down and vomiting and the spraying everything out of both ends, and body aches and cramps and bordering on seizures. And it was so bad, and it lasted, for me, it lasted 4 to 6 days, I can't really remember, that I considered going to the hospital. And I just set this sort of bar that I said, well, if blood comes out of me, out of any part of me, I'm calling an ambulance. Thankfully, that didn't happen. But what was revealed as all of that was coming out was all these hidden resentments, these hidden identity structures, this hatred and rage for the people who had inflicted themselves on me. The drug dealers and the people in prison and the parents and all of that. And what was really becoming clear is that each and every one of these things wanted to be seen, wanted to be felt through, wanted to be acknowledged. And at some point, someone else had told me to look at these emotions and look at them when they came up as the age that they were, or maybe the younger versions of myself that they were when they happened, or they were little children, and that I was now the adult in the room, and that I could create and hold space for that. That was a long process. And I did that in chunks and I did that in bits. And it seemed to take far longer than I thought. Now, when we've experienced trauma like this, because we've experienced stuff where everything says that we are not safe, this moving into this phase of the process, moving into these emotions when they show up, hits something so deep that says, absolutely not. Move away from this, defend, put up barriers, so on, so forth. The hardest part was understanding, or at least trying to understand what the process was. That there was something that was beyond my control, that wasn't trying to re-traumatize me. It was trying to heal this stuff. That it wanted to come up and out. That it wasn't there to scare me. It wasn't there to stop my process or my whatever, my continued unraveling. It was literally a movement in healing. And it was a stabilization and a slow deterioration and ultimately an unraveling and a removal of these fight or flight, panic, fear. The entire world, the entire existence is hostile labels and identities that had been on there. The one thing that I feel like that I said at some point without realizing that it would have such a profound effect. I think one thing that switched was the saying to myself, I'm willing to feel uncomfortable, which went completely contrary to everything. It went against everything that the body had been trained into, but I'm willing to feel uncomfortable because I had sensed some level of relief by unpacking the more superficial layers of trauma, the more superficial layers of identity. And it was just something that needed to happen. I think it's important to understand that when these things come up, when we are triggered, especially around that sense of safety, that there is, as we're moving through it, and if we've willingly begun to move through this process, there's a finite amount of what will need to be felt through. It is not endless. And in the moment, it can seem like it's forever, especially if it's triggering old wounds. We can get all kinds of messages, especially if we've already had a shift or a glimpse, and there's that sense of the unknown. That's a strong one there too, of I don't want to move into the unknown, because the unknown is where everything bad ever happened to me. If you're even further along, then when you're moving up into things like time and space, which is non-dual experience, right? When time and space start to collapse, I noticed very quickly that time at some point was just the relationship to it, or not lack of relationship to it, was almost irrelevant. But space, distance, objects, me here, you there, remained fixed. And it was sort of frustrating. And I went, all right, everyone else is talking about unity consciousness or the collapse of time and space, and they're all reporting that it's so lovely. So A, it's not happening for me, therefore I must be doing something wrong, right? Or B, it's just not in the cards for me. But in reality, the message is that on a deep, almost subconscious level, like not in thought and not in words, it's on an energetic level that says, That is unsafe. The unknown and space is unsafe. Why in the world would I ever, ever, ever want to dissolve into that? That's what brought me all the problems in the first place, right? Meditation and inquiry also at some point started out being my best friends, right? Creates stillness, sense of stillness, some peace, some regulation of the body, regulation of the emotions. Inquiry started to dissolve the more superficial layers of identity. But then what was left? What was left was that trauma ball just sitting there. And there was nothing else to look at. And there was nothing else to inquire about. And then all of a sudden, meditation and inquiry became a spot where there was enough stillness that this stuff is trying to break through and show up and be exposed and be seen and be felt through. And I think we can sense that almost on, it's not a conscious thought, I don't think, where we say, okay, well, oh, I'm getting too close to that. It's literally just energetic in nature where it just gets near it and then something just, it's like a magnet that's flipped the wrong way and gets near another magnet and it's immediately repelled. So now I don't have my solace of meditation and inquiry. And at this point, I'm far enough along to see, right? Enough of the identity has been seen through, enough of the futility of coping mechanisms has been seen through, that I'm at the mercy of this process, which now isn't, again, engaging a great sense of helplessness, a huge sense of panic. What's going to happen now? And as these two kind of forces met, it just, everything came to a standstill. And then there was a resultant, things felt flat. There felt like there was no movement anywhere. There was no more shadow stuff being revealed. Things began to feel kind of lifeless, feel very stagnant, felt very, very stuck. Right? If anyone's experienced that. I don't know how it unfolds for everybody. And I don't know what the catalyst is, nor would I really to move into that next thing. Nor would I really want to offer anybody advice on that realistically. This is just how things unfolded here. And so therefore, that's all I can speak on. I do know that stuff showed up when it needed to be showed up. And the only apparent thing that I needed to do was to be very, very mindful of and aware and willing to feel uncomfortable. A lot of moving into body sensations. Just where do I feel it? It's in the chest, it's in the gut, and stay with that for as long as I could. And many times that was just moments, minutes, and then massive permission to, when it felt like enough, to retreat. There are times to be courageous in this, to do the hero's journey, to take the leap. I think when trauma is still functioning and active, I think a gentler approach, at least possibly, can be a little bit wiser for a period of time until some of the bulk of that has been felt through and has been reduced. So it's things like give yourself a huge pass. And when I say pass, I mean permission. Permission if you feel motivated to dig into it, to feel it, also to do things that are comforting, that feel safe, whatever those happen to be for you. To absolutely not gauge any type of progress, to place the least amount of judgments on what's happening. Trauma, especially violence, things like that, can send heavy messages of personal responsibility to us, and we carry that into an awakening thing, i.e., like when it opens and closes, I am not getting it right. I can't get this right. I'll never get this. This is just how things are. And these are so deeply ingrained in the system. But it's important to start to look at those beliefs when the body is feeling regulated, not when we're activated. And that's just a sort of a tends to be like a managed situation until things get down. But then maybe you look at the underlying belief structure that's there and do it in bits, do it in chunks, do it in little tiny bite-sized pieces. It does not have to be taken all at once. Every time something is felt through, that little piece of it does not have to be felt through again. And again, this is a finite amount of stuff that needs to be felt through. Also, this is any and every means available at our disposal type of process. That means all the modalities, whether it's TRE, it could be something with the physical body, any of the somatic practices, a trauma therapist, whatever seems to work. So we don't close off any opportunities at all. I know that I spent an awful lot of time looking at certain things that I labeled either not in the non-dual realm or some type of indulgence in thoughts or some type of, oh, I shouldn't be at that point, especially since I've had some shifts, and refusing to do something about it or refusing to use whatever it was that was at my disposal that might have made moving through this a little less rocky, right? I was extremely hard on myself through this. Now here, obviously, it couldn't have happened any other way, but that does not mean that that is how it needs to happen for everybody. And I know so many of us will get up to that fear barrier where it feels unsafe and turn around and retreat. This process wants to bring this stuff up. It's up and out. It wants to heal this stuff. And I will say that anyone that has looked at 1 millisecond of the trauma that they've experienced and while going through this process and faced it and allowed it to be there and felt through it, I just want to say that I think that that's massively courageous. And I think it's huge. I think it's a fucking gigantic deal. It's not to be downplayed. It's not to be minimized in any way, shape, or form. When we're in this particular part of the unraveling process, there's an awful lot of stuff that's said that if we believe it can be quite detrimental. You've seen teachers say, I don't deal with trauma. I don't downplay trauma. We don't want to focus on that. At some point, possibly yes, because there can be an identification with the energetic, or excuse me, the personality structure itself, right? But it's time and place. It's all time and place. Whilst we're still in that very volatile thing, I think any and everything is fair game in terms of stuff that's not harmful, of course. But it can be self-care and self-love and comfort things. I have my favorite shows that I would watch on repeat. I have my favorite foods that I would get into. I take naps. I talk with people. I would remove myself from situations. I would go barefoot in the park. I would go to the beach. And we'll all have those specific versions of what those can be for us. And we get to use all of them. They're there for a reason. Later on down the road, it can be examined. And it can be seen that ultimately that this trauma ball is an identity structure that can and will be seen through and will eventually collapse. Not until all of it's fell through, or at least the vast majority of it. I normally don't put this out there, but if folks have specific questions, you're welcome to email me. It's in the bio, I think, and I'd be happy to answer. I do need to put the qualifier. I'm not a trauma counselor. I'm just a guy who went through this, and it had a very specific flavor here. It does not mean it's the flavor for everybody. So this is me just coming back to report after that trauma structure has collapsed. Be blessed.